Hello, everyone. This is Eric Pennington, Violet Baptist Church Mental Wellbeing Ministry, and we're doing a bit of a video cast today with Mr. James Hazley. Hello, James. How are you?
I am excellent. Happy to be here with you, Eric.
Thank you. I really appreciate it as well. And I know that when I initially asked you about doing this, I kind of just pulled you aside after the service and kind of said, "Hey, have any interest?" So,
Yeah.
in some ways, you're very brave. But I think this is going to be pretty painless. Sorry, I said painful.
Yeah. Was that a Freudian slip there?
Right. So what we're going to actually do, I think, is going to be very beneficial for the members of Violet as well as those in the community. And quite frankly, James, I know I've even given you a ton of detail about this ministry, but that's what we're aiming to do, to equip, if you will, to bring better well-being for those who attend Violet, as well as those in the community who might be curious about what this is all about, or they may actually be searching for resource. So as most of you have looked at our videos before, we're not going clinical. We are not trying to diagnose any true mental issues that may require the help of a clinician, but we are wanting to resource you. And certainly if you are in a place where you want something deeper, wider, you can always reach out to the church, the pastors, and quite frankly, James, you're in that group. So if they have something that goes deeper than what we cover, they can certainly reach out to you as well.
Absolutely.
So with that, I want to start kind of give a little bit of a background about why I wanted to have you on, James. I know we talked a little bit, but you're involved in ministry in the junior high area of Violet. So could you maybe tell everyone, most of the people are going to know what you do, what your role is, but maybe if you can tell them about that and how you came to Violet, just a brief overview for everyone.
Sure. And well, hello to everybody out there as you're watching, and really humbled and grateful to have the opportunity to have a great conversation with you, Eric. We've always had great conversations there at church, and I'm praying God will be in our midst to do the same here on our podcast here today. But my way into ministry was kind of an unconventional path. I come from a banking background. I'm actually a mortgage guy. That's what I do full time. That's the Clark Kent role that
That's good.
that I
Nice. I
have.
like that.
Yeah. So and I was actually at a space in my life where I'd actually kind of been away from the faith for a bit, just because of my own personal testimony, some things that I had some brokenness about, and I had made that commitment or that rededication back to Christ. And with that, I was deliberately seeking out mentorship. And I was thinking of a handful of guys that I could have that space to trust somebody and be vulnerable and to maybe even draw some potential out of me. And then I thought of, at that time, Coach Hurt. So for those of you that don't know, Pastor Keith in his former life was a high school basketball coach. I was on his high school basketball team. His wife, Debbie, also helped me through some very difficult times in math. So she tutored me. One of the main contributors to making sure that I got my high school diploma. So I appreciate her for that.
Yeah.
And they were just a great family. So I reconnected with him. And as we were going through my timeline, he just started to pick out certain pain points that I had. And he said, at some point in that conversation, James, did you realize that at this point in your life that you have a huge ministry to junior high because of things that you went through in that space in your life? And it was that light bulb moment. I was like, never thought of that. And the connection made sense. There was an opportunity to actually serve there under him at Violet. And so now I'm actually the youth director for junior high there, and been there for going over 2 years now.
Yeah.
And I think my time with the kids has actually grown me up more in my faith. I hope that I've added to their faith journey as well. And it's been good. It's been really, really good. But that was kind of my path into ministry.
Okay. All right. Great. Wonderful. I appreciate that. One of the things that I had Keith on one of our video casts probably a month or so ago, And the thing that's always intrigued me, and maybe intrigued is not the right word, is just flat out, parenting is hard.
Yes.
I mean, it's really hard work. I mean,
Yeah.
I know
Mhm.
you know that you're a parent, and
Yep.
you know, whether your kid is, you know, a junior high or a high school, and even in my case where they're young adults,
Mhm.
it is it's a continual process. And one of the things that we did talk about a little bit offline was what you are seeing, especially in light of the last year,
Right.
pandemic, race relations, all the politic, the election year, and even what happened after. What are you seeing out there in the group that of junior hires that you influence? What are some of the things that they're struggling with?
Man, that is a great question. I think that if you were looking at 2020 in retrospect, it
Mhm.
would depend on what stage of the year we were in,
Yeah, yeah,
because
sure.
there were such massive events happening at the same time, and it was so much information coming so fast. It was hard to kind of frame reality and what was actually happening.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I think when the pandemic first hit, I can just start there in March of last year. It was a culture shock for everybody because
yep.
life as we knew it, the routines as we knew it, it all came to a shutdown, literally. So um, there's a verse in the Bible that says, "Forsake not the assembling of yourselves together." All the more as you see the day of Christ approaching.
Yeah.
And yet we were in a place where we couldn't assemble, we couldn't gather. And if you're somebody that is more of an intellectual, doesn't necessarily subscribe to faith, you can also agree that human beings were just communal by nature. Like we
Social.
thrive in community. It's a
Yeah.
reason why we have to have relationships. You have to have solid friendships,
Yep.
a solid partner, and a support system. So for all of us in one fell swoop, we took out our support system. And what I found for junior hires is that a lot of them were kind of okay with it when it was like week one, week two, because they're used to that spring break, Christmas break,
Yep.
and hopefully we'll resume life as normal. But when you start changing the way that you are in a learning environment and detaching yourself from your friend group, and you're learning with your peers, but it's in a situation like this where everything's via Zoom, all those nonverbal cues that you're used to, that help you grow up, or how you challenge each other, or interacting in a class setting,
Mhm.
learning was different. It was also very difficult for the parents because we all were, you had to love your family because we were all in one batch
Right. Yeah.
for lengthy periods of time.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so there was depression, isolation, there was tension in homes. Even if you love your kids, I mean, kids are kids, so they'll drive you crazy. Because I know for we as men, a lot of times we like to do our work in isolation so we can focus.
Right.
But if you're telling him to get down off of that and leave the dog alone, and pick up your sister for me, fix your own lunch, and you're on a board meeting, you've got a suit jacket on and basketball shorts below. It's just like it's too much chaos going on.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the men in the home even were having a difficult time leading, just because you always look to leaders to frame reality and tell you what the next step is. And the honest answer is, even our experts for a while there were like, we don't know. We have to figure this out together.
Yeah.
So, the I would say if you kind of look a little bit past that, once we kind of adjusted to a new sense of this is how things are, that
Mhm.
you actually had kids that they were kind of split. Some actually enjoyed working at home and having a separate class schedule, but I know it's a health and wellness thing that, a routine is a big part of your mental health.
Yeah.
And if you're out of your routine and you're back to treating every day like it's Saturday and your sleep schedule is off, it messes with you a little bit. So, and then whenever human beings are in isolation, that's when we go to our escape. So, massive amount of times playing, video games, YouTube. Your parents are too busy, so you can't interact with them until they're done with work. So it just kind of drove them more and more and more into these corners where they would connect virtually with each other if they could, but the other issue with that is that matters of the soul are still happening. So if you're a junior hire struggling with, um, if you're struggling with depression or figuring out your sexual identity, or your best friend is the only person you confide in, but you're not allowed to see them. Like all these things are happening on the inside still. Life doesn't stop happening.
Yeah.
And yet we can't go to a safe place to kind of sort these things out. So I think there was a lot of confusion, in short. And I think that it was a very hard learning process for all of us.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to me because the aim of these video casts is certainly to give people some maybe practical, applicable tips to be able to manage their mental health. And maybe even the right term words would be brain health. Because oftentimes, James, I don't have to tell you that one of the areas of our facets of being a human being that gets ignored is our mental health.
Mm-hmm.
If you said to somebody, hey, I just, I have a high ankle sprain, we immediately say, so did you go to a podiatrist? Did you go to an orthopedic surgeon? How's that working
Yeah.
out for you? How long is rehab? But if we say, I've hit an emotional wall and I'm not sure what to do, if we're honest, even in the church, we kind of get uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
We kind of, I'll pray for you, that kind of thing. But what's interesting, right, is that if you have a podiatrist or an orthopedic surgeon, why wouldn't you have a counselor?
Yeah.
And I think America in general has spent way too much time stigmatizing
Mm-hmm.
brain health challenges, right?
Yeah.
So, and you and I are going to talk some personal stuff today, but I certainly want to think about it in terms of, obviously, we're not clinicians. We're not trying to diagnose or prescribe.
Sure.
But James, what are some of the effective things that you did as a parent, right? And what maybe you've seen that has been a great solution at managing times of great change and upheaval?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of different ways. So I think that some practical things, I recognized pretty early that reestablishing a routine was going to be really important, just so that I had an anchor in my day.
Yeah.
So after a couple of weeks of being on conference calls where I was wearing sweatpants and turning the video off,
Yeah.
I looked at myself in the mirror one day. I was like, dude, this isn't who we are. We gotta get this situation together.
Yeah.
Right. So it started very small with I'm still gonna get up and follow my morning routine, shower, brush my teeth, pick out an outfit that I would wear to work, wear my, button up, at least some jeans.
Yeah.
And I actually felt better just because I was establishing a new routine. So, I still needed to find ways to be active or work out, even if it was only like 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
Just because I think all of us found out very quickly, especially if you're in a high performance job where you're working 9-10 hour days and you're sitting the whole time, and then you're just going to sit inside afterwards.
Yeah.
It doesn't take long to visit the pantry one time too many, and your waistline's a little bit different,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are some practical things. The other thing is self-awareness is really important. One thing that I know about myself is that I'm an empath, which means that I take on emotions and feelings, and I have interpersonal feelings that I have to kind of sort out on my own so that I can be of better use to other people around me.
Yeah.
So I actually, this might seem kind of weird, but I looked in the mirror one day when I was struggling with all this confusion, and I said to myself, this is hard. And I just acknowledged the fact that it was hard. You don't lose anything by acknowledging that there's something different. So that was a big thing for me. So when I actually came to that, I was like, okay, now that it's hard, why do I feel anxiety? And then I started to kind of piece things back together, because once you identify the problem, then you can go into problem solving mode. So then I was like, well, okay, great. Now that I've established a structure for myself, I need a structure for my son. So he's going to go to bed at the exact same time as always. He's going to get up at the same exact time as always. I'm going to be on his back just to make sure that he's got his video on during his Zoom calls. I'm checking in. I'm the principal now, so I'm walking the halls, checking the doors. Are you in class? When's your next one? You're not to be roaming the hallways.
Yeah.
So a routine was really, really important. And I think being a man of faith, I love the fact that Christ made everything so simplistic. So, and I hope before my time is done, people understand that I always will preach the fundamentals, which as a person of faith, your anchor is and always will be prayer, reading God's word, and songs of worship. And essentially encompassed all three of those things that's church. You can have church wherever you are. And as those matters of the soul are happening, it requires that spiritual prescription, for lack of a better term, to kind of sort through your emotions, pass it through a filter, and see that God is still in control.
Yeah.
And once I actually arrived at that, I was like, okay, this isn't God's first pandemic. He's been through a few of them.
Yeah. Well, I had this vision in my head of, God saying to us, hey guys, this is not my first rodeo.
Right. It's like, you guys should have seen Bubonic. It was
right. Yeah, right.
This is light work.
Yeah. James, you mentioned something there, and it has come to my mind, even in the work that I do outside of the church world, secular world, I guess, as you'd call it.
Yeah.
Is this idea of what we do with our emotions, how we manage them, right?
Yeah.
And it really kind of connects to what Paul was talking about, holding every thought captive.
Yes.
And you mentioned something there about looking yourself in the mirror and making the statement that this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
I've encountered a number of people, inside, outside, Christ follower, non-believer, whatever you want to use, who really, that's strange to them.
Mm-hmm.
And what I have explained is that the idea of naming it is really, really important.
Yeah.
Because we do have some misconceptions about what that means.
Mm-hmm.
When you do name it, when you hold that thought captive, that sets you on the path of where you can begin to plan on how you're going to either tackle it, how you're going to change, on and on.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
So I also thought about what you were saying there about a routine. Again, something that I think a lot of us might take for granted because, right, typically especially pre-pandemic, you did it. I get up at 6 and I do this and then I do that. And then I'm in an office and you just rinse and repeat.
Right.
But again, I think you hit on something there that's really, really important. And it's also not allowing your circumstances to dictate the routine, but God has given you the authority, right, to dictate that.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that one thing that I try to do in general is that if I feel like I'm reacting to life instead of being proactive, I know that that's mentally a time that I need to check in with myself.
Yeah.
Because I like to be on the offense, and I know that God is like, from a providential standpoint, He's in control of everything. But I like to be in control of my decisions and how I'm carrying myself.
Well, and James, I'm interrupting you, but what you just said there, God has given us certain things that we're supposed to have control over.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I kind of joke around with folks is that, when God gives you a call to something, okay, and says, hey, I want you to be this. And in your case, one example is, I want you to be a ministry leader.
Yeah.
Right. Well, what do you need to do to be an effective ministry leader? Well, one of the things is God's word, right?
Yes.
But when was the last time God picked up your Bible for you, James? Right?
It just floats into your
head, right? No, James, you're responsible for picking up your Bible and turning the pages, or
there's no Mary Poppins gospel, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly, right? Oh, I want everyone out there to understand that there's some things God has given you as your responsibility. You're the one to manage that and take care of that.
Amen.
I firmly believe, again, to the root of this mental health, mental well-being is, if you're finding yourself in a ditch emotionally,
Hmm.
mentally, and it's not enough that your life group is praying for you. That's not I mean, again, that's not to dismiss that. It's just saying if it goes deeper,
Yeah.
you're the one that's responsible to go, I need something deeper.
Yes.
And James,
Yeah.
I may ask you to pray for me as I'm searching for a counselor, or
Hmm.
I'm going into therapy, whatever it may be. But that's your responsibility. It's our responsibility to know, again, this idea that somehow God is just going to deliver it to your door like the UPS guy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Could that happen? Yes. Would that be miraculous? Yes. But in most cases, most of us are living our lives in the mundane, the everyday. And, it's just important for us to take that responsibility. I want to, I want to go at it also from a different angle when it comes to thinking of it from a race perspective. And
Okay.
you and I have had some conversations, again, those, after church in the hallway, not as much as it once was, but we've had some of those. And I want to talk about the race dynamic, not from a what has been done wrong and what has been injustice, but
Hmm.
how we manage our emotions and our mental health in that dynamic, right?
Yes.
So we can share and compare and talk about that, things I've done, things you've done, but I want to kind of go at it from the angle asking you, James. So it seemed like 2020 was the year that there was a match that was lit under the
Mm.
subject matter and under the dynamics of it. Some good, some not so good. Um, but regardless, I don't think any person of color would say that, oh, I never noticed that. I didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
Um, so what are some of the things that not only in 2020, but maybe even previously or current, what have you done to help your mental well-being, certainly in your relationship with Christ, that you found to be effective to help you navigate that?
Yeah. I think that kind of talking through this, I've realized that my process has been the same for experiencing, um, I don't think trauma is the right word, but
Hmm.
it, just major interruptions in life. Um, and it was similar. I think that I'll give you an example. So we talked about acknowledgement. So when the George Floyd thing happened,
Yeah.
I found that I was incredibly angry,
Mhm.
like incredibly angry.
Yeah.
Um, and it took me a long time to sort through all of those emotions. So this is one thing that I'll say to be vulnerable, but hang with me just because it was a heated moment of passion that I had not had a chance to get past it through the filter.
Hmm.
So I'm going to speak to the truth of that moment and then how I actually worked my way through it.
Yes.
So I was dealing with feelings of anger, rage, um, a sense of injustice, and also a sense of wanting to hold someone accountable.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing too that was driving me crazy is that like that news clip played on 24-hour news cycles just over and over and over and over
Yeah.
again. So even though the event only happened one time, in my mind it happened hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think for a lot of times when I'm trying to express how that feels to someone who is maybe of a different ethnic group,
Yep.
I found that there's not much utility in that conversation just because it's kind of like trying to explain the color blue to someone who's blind or trying to explain a symphony to a deaf person. It's just, you have to be able to experience it to know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And since I can't communicate my experience to you, it's, for lack of a better way to put it, it's not real to them, So it's
Yeah.
just, so I think I started to realize that I shouldn't involve myself in conversations where someone doesn't understand my experience.
Hmm.
Because that actually helps me in maintaining my energy. And so that was the first thing. But the next thing I had to acknowledge is the fact that I was angry. And I was like, okay, so why am I angry?
Hmm.
Um, and kind of tying a link between those two things. Um, every person of color actually has a lifetime of stories that are not common knowledge to the world at large.
Right.
So I find that those events actually trigger those moments in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in a moment of passion, you can tie them all together. And it's just like, and it builds to this greater feeling that we've all felt as a greater community. If you're part of the African American community or a person of color, where it's, you know, historically, there's plenty to point to where if you tie it all together at one time, you could ignite that rage in a moment's notice. It just takes one more event.
Yeah.
So it actually drove me to a point where, and this is where I'm just being vulnerable, is like, maybe I should focus on just ministry to young boys that are, you know, young Black men.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe I should focus on, you know, the group that, you know, is most vulnerable, that needs a lot of saving, since no one understands their experience. One thing that I learned about myself in anger is that I can paint generalities for things that I don't have specific information for.
Oh, wow.
And that is not a fun thing to say out loud. But when I came to that realization, I was like, say that one more time. I'm painting generalities about things that I don't have specific information for. And then I came to a moment of, what's also funny is I actually, during that time, I had to go back to my anchor. And at that time I was reading through Joshua. Okay. And Joshua, like, that's a great book about conquering and slaying. And I'm like, yeah, I'm on this whole injustice kick. Like, Joshua's my book right now. And I felt burdened on my heart where the Lord wanted me to read through Jonah. I was like, God, are you serious?
Yeah. Oh, that'll.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Here's where I started to correct by passing it through that filter and going back to my routine or my anchor.
Right.
In the book of Jonah, as you know where I'm leading this, the gospel is for everyone. It's for every person. And if I compare my experience to the cross, I'm not above anyone. Even somebody that I staunchly disagree with, I'm not above them because I've been forgiven too. And that's a very hard place to come to when you feel like there is injustice that needs to be reconciled immediately. So, so I guess some large takeaways from that is that I've kind of settled in my heart and mind that, you know, on this side of heaven, we're never going to see justice the way that we see fit. Because ultimately there's one righteous judge. The practical part of that is that you still have to acknowledge the wrongs that happen. There's still space for things like activism and fighting against injustice.
Yes.
But I think doing that under or with the anchor of realizing that even if you are at odds with someone, as a believer, if we share Christ in common, as a believer, you should be acting in love to a point where we're going to still be in a space where not only we can share the gospel with someone, but that actually has an opportunity to be a common denominator between us. But as soon as you start to paint generalities, that's when we go into tribalism, survival mode, wanting to kill each other, quite literally. And that's pretty dangerous. It's pretty dangerous. So once your mind goes into a us versus them type of mentality, it's very hard to come back, especially if you act on it, because then you end up doing things that you can't take back. You know, so I was very quiet during that time. You know, people were saying, James, how do you feel? Like, I'm not sure, bro.
Well, but you know what? You said something there that I really want to kind of touch on again, and this idea about explaining to those that don't have the reference points to be able to understand. Okay? So I'll give you an example it's non-race related, but it's going to lead me into talking about empathy. So Eileen and I, my wife, you know her, of course, we lost our second child from a pregnancy thing that went south.
Wow.
And I never forget, we weren't going to Violet at the time. So Rick was not our pastor. And the pastor that we had at that time, he did something that it was one of the biggest gifts I've ever been given. And James, I broke the news and he said, Oh, Eric, I'm so sorry. That's just really tough. That's got to be really tough for you. That's all he said.
Mhm.
And as I look back, and I'm not trying to put everybody into my category saying you should receive a certain bit of advice or counsel from someone the way I did. But the one thing that was profound about it for me is that he acknowledged it. Like, I
Mhm.
see it. Like, I
Right.
see you are struggling with this.
Yes. Yeah.
But he did not go to try to convince me that he knew what that was all about. And we've all been on the receiving end of it. Oh, Eric, when I was 24, I experienced, and you're going, you can't. So, and it's not to take anything away from those who are well intentioned, right?
Right.
Because we
Hmm.
all feel that pressure at times, right? I want to fix it for you. I want to
Yes.
say
Yeah.
something that will make it better for you. The
Hmm.
George Floyd situation, you are not going to be able to make that better for an African American because
No.
we all have history and experiences that I don't expect you to understand
Yeah.
because it's not there's no connection there for you to understand it. But
Hmm.
what is really powerful, and again, I want to speak for me, is when I have someone that says, I'm sorry. I know that has to be tough for you. Is
Yeah.
there
That goes
any
a long way.
It goes a long way because you're showing empathy.
Yeah.
You know,
Hmm.
you have moved from the sympathy part. The sympathy part is, wow, that's terrible that those kind of things happen to people like you.
Hmm.
Empathy says, I'm sorry, James. I don't know exactly what you're experiencing inside, but I imagine it's got to be tough. Is there anything I can do?
Hmm.
That's huge.
That's massive. That is
Right.
absolutely massive.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love how you made that conscious decision of, I'm not going to go and engage in dialogue with those whom I don't think fully could understand. And
Right.
correct me if I'm wrong, James. That was not you saying, oh, they'll never get it, so I'm not even going to talk to them. It's not that kind of thing, right?
No. No. It wasn't that at all. I think that I am. My biggest concern in conversations that are this important is to make sure that our time is fruitful. And if I can get from somebody that they actually want to have a level of relationship
Yeah.
where they have the empathy to want to learn more about my experiences,
Yep.
then we have an opportunity to actually exchange stories and change from it. But if somebody automatically has a wall up, you can talk to a wall all you want. It's definitely not going to talk back, and it certainly isn't going to team up with you to make your life better. So
Yeah.
I think just being a good judge of those people that are walls and those people that actually want to partner in prayer with you. So, and this is the other thing where I was able to take a massive cultural thing that was happening
Yep.
and realize what was actually happening in my life.
Yeah.
So in my life, I thought to myself, I have to take personal responsibility for where I'm planted. So what does that mean? I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for my son. And I can't just have this turnabout in the church where I'm planted because I'm having this emotional reaction to something that uh, definitely is definitely something that it requires the attention that it's being given, but I can't let this impact the day-to-day relationship that I have with the junior high kid that I'm helping who's a white kid. I'm like, he has
Yeah.
nothing to do with that.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's
He
awesome.
has nothing to do with that. So I
Yeah.
had to separate it out and realize that there's macro and there's micro. On the
Yeah.
macro, as a society, we got some junk that we need to sort through.
Yeah.
And those we need to go through inconvenient truths and have healthy dialogue with people that we can actually have positive change with. Um, Micro, like I'm still responsible for the world that I've been given charge over,
Yeah.
and I still have a responsibility to the people that I actually prior to that said I'm committed to you guys. I'm going to partner with you in love to sort through these problems. And then I started to realize I actually had more opportunity to share not just hope, but my experience with a new, with the young leaders that I'm working with,
Yeah.
and plant seeds in their hearts about compassion and how Christ sees justice, or my experiences. It's an opportunity. So,
Yeah. And you know what, too? This reminds me, James, of and I mentioned this even just before we were recording about being Zoom bombed. And I didn't tell you the entire story because it has some powerful application, I believe, just from my experience. So for the audience, is James, we were in my work, we were doing an interview with an individual. This was not very long after the George Floyd situation, and it was an interview style, but we had audience, right? So people had joined and were listening, and then we were setting it up such that you could ask questions, whether you were typing in the chat or whether you were unmuted, and that kind of thing. So about maybe 5 minutes to 10 minutes in, we got Zoom bombed. And for those that don't know what that is, that basically is your Zoom call gets hacked and people join that maybe are not supposed to be there.
mhm.
So that happened. And those folks that hacked the call, they began spewing out the kind of language that for someone of an African American background would find very offensive. And it was directed at me, no doubt.
Wow.
Um, I'm a leader who is called to, I love how you said, the macro and the micro. So the macro is, I wasn't very pleased. And I'm understating that, I know, but that typically is my style.
Yeah.
I wasn't happy.
Mhm.
Micro is, I've got an audience and I've got someone who's a guest. I got to take care of this problem. And
Yeah.
the way I took care of the problem is I just announced that we're going to end the call now, and boom, it was over.
Mhm.
Everybody re-logged in. We got everything squared away. We finished it up.
Mhm.
Happens though, James, that one of the people on the call was a client of ours. And I had a call with him about 2 weeks later. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And he said, Eric, I know we're having this call to talk about certain things that relate to our business relationship, but I just want to tell you, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I know that had to be tough to hear and to experience, especially in light of all that's been happening. And
Wow.
I said, his name is Brad. And I said, Brad, I really appreciate you saying that. There's also something that you should also know as an African American male who's experienced a lot over the time that I've walked this planet. Someone helped me understand that in order for those things that were said to be relevant and valid, I'd have to agree with them. I said, but Brad, I didn't agree with them.
Mm.
So if I don't agree with them, that implies that there's a lack of consensus about what they said.
Mhm.
So then that means, who's got the problem? It's not me.
Right.
And I see it through the eyes of Christ, James, that those who harbor that kind of feeling, those kind of sentiments, have
Mhm.
deep psychological issues.
Yeah, most often.
And I would dare say those folks are left with the problem. Now, it's not my grandiose way of saying, well, it didn't hurt me. That's not that. It's not about that. It's about an
Mhm.
agreement,
Right.
because we all know what happens when you make agreement with things.
Mhm.
Our enemy of our souls calls on us typically daily to make agreements that are counter to what Christ has said.
Yeah.
Allah, James, Eric, you're not worth it. You don't have what it takes. You're not capable.
Right.
James, I've got some things in my past that I might, if I'm not careful, I could agree with him because I've messed up.
Yeah.
I've failed.
Yeah.
So you make that agreement, then basically you've started down a path that becomes really difficult to unwind.
Yes.
So I
Mhm.
say all that to say, ultimately, how we manage injustice and these issues are better served from a perspective of, who died for me on that cross? and rose from the dead. You know what, James? If I were the only living human being in all of history, he would have done it all over again
Mm.
to save me. So that's a
Amen.
pretty powerful thought when you want to think about the ideas of justice and about righting of wrongs and being what's really going on.
Right.
Because whether you're that police officer that had his knee on, George Floyd, or whether you're just that executive in JP Morgan Chase or
Hmm.
some other corporation, there's one dance that we're all going to do, and we're going to do it alone.
Yes.
We're
Wow.
going to do it alone. So,
Perspective.
yeah, right. So, as we kind of get close to the close here, I do want to ask you about what do you say to maybe you're on, let's take the two polar opposites.
Hmm.
Maybe you're not of an African American background, and maybe you believe that maybe all this stuff that's happening is not that big of a deal. Or maybe you're on the other side and you're thinking, well, man, it's a huge deal and there's so much injustice and there's so much that's wrong.
Hmm.
Do you believe there is some secret, some way in which those parties could maybe come together and maybe not have Thanksgiving dinner together, but certainly could maybe begin to build a bridge that is healing? So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you for one or two things that you think that could bring those two polars maybe together.
Yes. It's relationship and time together.
Hmm.
Um, I can't help it as a minister. I try to have to paint an example for everything. But um, one thing that I love about activities that bring people together, you take a basketball team, for example.
Ah,
Uh, you take a high school group of boys that are from different parts of town, different economic backgrounds, you give them a common activity together, and you bind them together under one identity, that being a team. They then have to sort through their differences and figure out how to operate together as one.
yeah.
Um, and it also, that camaraderie builds a sense of community where you start to care about one another. And the only opportunity that we have for change is our day-to-day relationships where I'm close enough to you that I actually care about what goes on in your life. So if I care about you, that's going to be pretty obvious at some point, just because I'm going to start with really practical things like, hey man, how's your day going?
Yeah.
And that's when I know what's going on with you. And you can say, actually, I'm glad you asked. I'm not doing so hot. I
Yeah.
had all these things happening. And then if we're believers, we then have that opportunity to go together in prayer and we actually labor through that thing together until you see a victory in that.
Yeah.
But if you are going to continue to be a keyboard warrior and fight your polar opposites on social media,
Well,
like I just want to let some people know, like, because I see that on social media a lot, especially on Facebook during the election times. And I wanted to tell the generation before me, I was like, homie, like, as the younger generation looking at you guys, you're not only you're not solving anything, but you're turning my Facebook into a bathroom wall. Like, it's not going anywhere.
yeah.
It's not going out anywhere. It's
Very
the way
powerful.
that I read it. How they intend it is I'm taking a megaphone and telling the world how I feel. How I read it is you're at a 7-Eleven in a stall and says call Sally 411. Like that's how it's received. That's how it's received.
That's
So
great wisdom there, James. Wow,
yeah.
that's really, yeah, that's powerful, man. That's really
Yeah,
powerful.
but I mean, you just take Jesus and his disciples, they went from being strangers to them being a group. The
Yeah,
activity they had together was becoming fishers of men. And through
yeah,
that daily activity together of breaking bread and learning about each other's stories, they started to care about one another to the point where, actually seeing change in the world became a unified front that they all could stand on. So,
yeah. And I would tell you, just as an add to that, I was on a call a couple of weeks ago, and this gentleman, his name is Ajane, uh, which is just a beautiful name in and of itself. we got to talking about the, the ongoing effort to try to address inequalities, maybe some things that are systematic, right, in nature.
Mhm.
And I loved how he approached it. He said, we're not going to solve this with anything other than LOVE. And his perspective is a Christ love,
Mhm.
because that's the only thing that changes people fundamentally.
Yes.
You're never going to be able to look at another human being, whether they're from Africa, whether they're from Asia, whatever you want to use. You're never going to be able to fully look at them through a lens of equality and caring, and until you have Christ's love in you. And we both, actually, there's another person who was on the call. We came to the conclusion that's why Martin Luther King Jr.'s impact was so massive.
Mhm.
And it's because he had that. He had that Christ love driving the mission of changing things. And
Mhm.
I think whether it's in the area of race relationships or whether it's in the area of mental health, that's the common denominator that we need, is that Christ love. And somehow in America, whether it's in the church or outside the church, I think we've kind of gotten away from that very simple, as you said earlier, sort of the practical, fundamentals, I think is what you said.
Mhm.
That's the fundamental, James.
Yeah.
Christ love.
Amen.
And my hope is, and that's kind of again, wanting you on this interview and why this ministry is, that we get people to a place of understanding that through all of the haze and the noise of the world we live in, there's Christ who stands and says, I have the answer
Mhm.
for your mental well-being, from your racial interactions and maybe strife, if you'll just come to me.
Mhm.
Right. So that's my hope. James, I really appreciate you taking out the time of your busy schedule of a day to lend this. And my hope is that those that will listen to this and see this video will find some things that they can take away. Because the one thing I love about how God operates is that he's this creative God that is so unique. So
Mhm.
maybe you and I will walk away from here, and this afternoon we'll have an opportunity to apply God's love in a way that maybe we never even imagined would happen, right?
Right.
Maybe there's going to be a parent that's going to say, man, he talked about routine, and that's something I haven't tried. And that's maybe what God has been trying to get their attention on.
Mhm.
So James, if someone who's listening to this and they're maybe not in Violet, right, and don't see you on Sunday mornings, if they want to talk more with you or they want to learn more about something you said today, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, my Facebook, you can actually message me. First name James, last name Hazley, Hazley.
Okay.
And my heart is specifically for. I mean, I want to share the love of Christ with everyone. Obviously, my specific assignment right now is junior high.
Yeah.
If I were to drill even deeper, that would be for young men, especially,
Yeah.
and for young men that are struggling with things like trying to figure out their identity, struggling with fatherlessness,
Mhm.
maybe dynamics at home are less than perfect. Just letting them know that God is Lord over it all, and
Yeah.
He's Lord over the gray area. And I love to connect. That'd be great.
That's great. And then your what is your email for Ed Violet? It just simply, is it, I'm going to butcher it. So why don't you give your email for Violet or that kind of thing?
You know what? I actually can't remember it offhand.
Okay, and this is the beauty of this, because we're just having a conversation. What's a
Yeah,
good email for you, James, that if somebody does want to get in touch with you, how about that?
perfect. Yeah, so a good email for me is James Hayes, HAZE05 @gmail.
All right, perfect. We appreciate your time, brother. I'm glad that we could talk, and if you don't mind,
Absolutely.
I'm going to invite you back if you're good with that.
Oh, I'm good with it. Yeah,
All right.
I'm actually humbled and grateful for the opportunity, man. And this was just like after church, I enjoyed the conversation. So hopefully we
That's
had
what we're striving for. You know that. That's what we're striving for. Is a great conversation. So with that, everyone,
we just invited the group to a little coffee talk. That's all.
There you go. There you go. There you go. And everyone, for those who have tuned in today, we appreciate it. And get in touch with James if you'd like to learn more. And then certainly, I guess I should say the best way to get a hold of me if you're wanting to get with me directly is I'm at eric.pennington@icloud.com, and look for more videos as we're going forward in this ministry. And we really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you. Thanks, James.
Thanks so much.